Hey guys, and welcome back to another video on Lumber Capital Log Yard. The boss is an expert at chainsaw chain sharpening, and today he's going to be going over with you guys chain sharpening on a grinder versus doing it by hand. So without further ado, let's bring him in.
Today we're going to do a video on sharpening your chainsaw chains. I did a video maybe a year and a half ago on the same thing. It was a very comprehensive video, but there's several details I wanted to cover today. So we're going to do, this video is going to be on hand sharpening versus using a grinder. And I want to talk about different grinding wheels and different techniques for grinding your chains instead of hand filing. So if you come over here, we have a kit you can get from Oregon. I'm sure that if you're running steel chainsaws, steel probably makes something similar. As a matter of fact, I know they do. I've seen them in the shops. And this has your basic hand filing tools in it. And this would be what your package represents. So you have a round file and it has a file gauge on it. And the file gauge allows you to go flat across your chain tooth. So that, and it also has the degrees on there so that you're able to see that you're maintaining the correct degree across the tooth. This happens to be a 7/32 file. I always have like a case of these in my saw toolbox. It's very important that when you're working outside that you keep those files dry. If they rust at all, you have to throw them out. So that's your basic hand filing tool. The second tool is a flat file. The flat file is for your rakers. Again, this all comes in a neat package. And then a very important tool a lot of people don't use is your Raker gauge. And this is an important tool to use. You don't want to get your rakers filed too low. If you get them filed too low, your chain is very aggressive in the wood, and it first of all, it dulls your chain, believe it or not, because you're pulling out too much product at one time. And if you don't have a very powerful chainsaw, it will actually stall your saw. The last tool that they have in this package is for cleaning out your bar. So this would be for cleaning your rails on your bar. And if you come over here, I'll just give you an example. So because you're using heavy oil, the oil has tack in it. It's really no different than your basic 30 weight oil. Then they put an additive in it to make it sticky. So you put this in your bar and you pull it, you pull it through, and you can see, there's just a ton of material that comes out of there. So that needs to be cleaned up. But a very important thing about cleaning up your bar is that your oil ports are clean. So I'm going to put this under the light and I'm going to show you. This is your oil port. So this is where the bar oil is forced into the bar. It comes in on the back side, and then as the chain runs through the bar, it drags the oil up around the tip and will actually come out the bottom. Especially on a hot day, you're going to throw a lot of oil. So as you clean out your bar, a very important thing, and really Oregon should put a point on the back of this tool, because you may need to stick something in there to clean the dirt out of that little port. Okay, I want to talk briefly about bar maintenance. One of the things that is I replied to a lot of comments previously, people don't understand how important the bar is to the chain cutting properly. So if you come over and you look at the top of this bar, now this is off our processor, it's very important that your rails are flat across. And if you feel, I think you might even be able to see it on this bar, these are mushroomed out. Like I can't run my fingernail up across there. Okay, see that's mushroomed out. So now your chain is narrower than your bar when that begins to happen. This is a higher carbon steel than your chain. The chain should be softer so the bar lasts, but eventually they begin to wear, and they also get uneven because there's no perfect cut coming down. So this side is actually higher than the other rail. So these need to be ground down flat. The mushroom needs to be taken off this way, and now you have a place to start. So once you have that done, there is another very important issue that most people miss when their chain may not be cutting properly because they are missing a very important element. The other thing is that as your bar wears, you have drive teeth that of course are moving through it. And I know everybody knows this, but these are the drive links. And that is actually how they measure the length of your chain. A lot of times they'll say, oh, it's X numbers of drive links. The chains I run on my saws happen to be 72 drive links. So of course that's what's running through your gear cog, and that's what powers the chain around. Well, as that runs through your bar actually begins to delaminate. So it actually opens up. And when that happens, your chain will lay over to one side. Now, let's get a view right down the chain. See how much that's moving in there? That is way too much tolerance, and that needs to be brought in. I use the example of if you've ever been in a power boat and you're sitting still in the water and you want to take off, say with a water skier behind you, or you just want to take off real fast. As your prop spins, it's not grabbing the water quite properly until the boat begins to move, and then it will bite into the water and make you go. But you're cavitating when you take off. If you are making a cut, just a simple firewood cut, and your saw is coming down straight into your firewood, and it's just cutting perfectly, and then it stops, that is because what is happening is your bar is actually pinching on one side and then on the other, and you're making a slight sweep in your cut. That is because your bar is not the tolerances are not proper on your bar, and your chain just falls off to one side. So it's cutting heavier on one side and less on the other, and as it comes down, you're making a C cut in your firewood piece. It will just frustrate you all day if you don't know what's going on. It's not easy to get those tolerances back in. I don't know, we should have a tool out here somewhere. It's something I actually went to a machine shop and had it manufactured. And what we will do is we will put a gauge right in the groove, and then we will take a ball peen hammer and pound the bar back in. We'll do that on both sides. A lot of times when you do that, you will get your tolerance off just a little bit because you're using a hammer. And you have to make sure that you put your chain back in, and you have to flip your bar around and do both sides, of course, so that your chain then runs through. And if you have a hot spot in there, then you need to take a straight screwdriver or something and just open it back up a little bit. If this happens with your chainsaw and you just, you aren't satisfied and you've dealt with it, really I would go get a new bar. Of course, being a logger, I always have 2 or 3 bars in my truck at any particular time, because at the log site is not the time to be trying to beat one back into shape. I wouldn't even attempt it. It requires a lot of thought and diligence. It's best to get it back to a workbench. And we are always using these tools. We always have a vise ready to go. We have the grinder. We have plenty of light. And then we have a whole spot, where we can hand file and stuff. At the log site, I always use the vise. I have one built that I manufactured. I put it in my receiver and it's level with my tailgate on my pickup. So I'm able to put the whole chainsaw with the bar and everything right on there, and then that's how I hand file. So we're going to take a look at hand filing versus grinding, and I want to show you just a couple things before we talk about the grinder. What I want to show you about the teeth is they will get a shiny spot on the tip. And this is actually over here is your cutting edge. It's right here where you're cutting. But your tooth gets rounded over. On this particular tooth here, I can see it is shiny and it is rounded over, and the tip itself isn't sharp. So this is, if you were hand filing, you would come across there until that is straight across and that shiny spot is actually removed. And if your tooth is dipping down at all, that has to be taken off. You will not cut. And it's one of the things about hand filing is most of us are not truly ambidextrous. So when I hand file, I usually take 3 or 4 swipes with my right hand on the right side, and then when I'm on the other side of the chain, I'll have to take an additional swipe or 2 to get it cleaned up, because it's not my power side to cut on. So you need to remove the part where the cutting tooth is falling, it's just angled down like that. It's often apparent because it's shiny. Now the second thing is that use your Raker gauge and you put it on your tooth, and that Raker should be flat across, and that's how you take it down and put it back in. Now if you are only hand filing and not doing your Rakers, after 2 or 3 times of hand filing, that Raker is going to hold it's going to be higher than your cutting tooth, so that as you go through the wood, the Raker actually is pushing, the chain up, and you're not capturing your cut. So it's very important that the Raker and the tooth are at the same level. And that is done, again, I think it's a very simple and easy way. I know a lot of loggers, professional loggers, probably wouldn't touch a Raker guide, but they're sharpening, 4 or 5, maybe 6 times a day, and they're just, it's part of their DNA to do it. I still use one, and I've done this for decades, so I like to get it honed in correctly. Okay, I want to go over with you some proper techniques, some things I've learned about sharpening on on a mechanized grinder. And I wanted to add this into the video. It wasn't something that was done on our previous video, because even though you may not be doing this at home, some of you may, but a lot of you will take your chains in to be sharpened. And there's some different things that as you get your chain back, your sharpener may not be doing and could be doing to make things better. First of all, chances are they're not going to do your rakers. So you're going to need your flat file and your raker guide. The second thing is, when you use a grinder, you remove a lot of your tooth, and you are wearing your cutting tooth off quickly. Where I can hand file, I can cut every day. I can run 10 gallons of gasoline through my chainsaw and still have the same chain on there if I haven't hit a stone or something, which happens. But so what I want to talk to you about with this is, there's different kind of grinding wheels. There's your standard stone. I don't use that stone. We use a Borzon stone. So it's a stainless steel wheel with Borzon on the tip. And it does wear out, but this can be recoated, which saves a little bit of money. This wheel's, I think we looked on the internet, I think it's $265. I just bought from Stoll's Saw Shop there in Pennsylvania. I think I paid $210, so it was significantly less than we found on the internet. So, and again, this can be recoated. This gives a very, very good and consistent grind. The other thing is that if you're using a standard stone, the stone wears out as you grind, and your settings and your tensions are changing, actually as you are grinding, because the wheel is wearing out, so it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter, so you have to keep changing your height adjustment, which is something you should know. It also changes the profile, where if you use this Borzon wheel, your profile remains the same every time and your height remains the same every time. So yes, it's a lot more money, but in the end, it saves you a lot of time and headache from constantly readjusting. You simply, when you're done running your grinder, we have carb cleaner in here, you just spray a little bit of carb cleaner off. When the grinder's off and it's still going around a little, you just hit it, and then I usually wipe it down, and then that will clean off the grinder and get the Borzon coating. It will get all the dirt and metal fines out of it. You are constantly grinding on one side, and that side will wear out, and when it does, you just simply flip it over. These last a very long amount of time, and like I said, they're really maintenance free. So I'm not going to turn the grinder on, but there's some different techniques that I'd like to mention to you. Generally, when we grind, we will double tap the tooth. So I come down and take sort of a cleaning swipe, and then I'll come down and do sort of a clean out swipe. And that is very important to do because if you come down hard on your tooth, you are changing, you're actually changing the metal of the tooth itself, and you're going to harden the tooth. You will never be able to hand file once you use a grinder. You'll have to get through that heavy layer of steel once you do so. So we use the grinder a lot because of the firewood processor. It's of course running, that's a 50 horsepower engine running a hydraulically powered saw. So I'm not as concerned about it being as finely tuned as what I can hand file. But what I want to show you is, as you bring that tooth forward and you come down, you would tension in like this, but it's still important that you hold the chain back and that you're putting tension on there, because you don't want the chain to lay over at all, because it will change the profile of your cutting. And when you turn the chain around, and you're doing the other side of the chain, it's very important that you're getting the same exact profile on each side. And as you do this, you can move the chain forwards and backwards to get the right amount off. You really want to keep the tooth on each side of the chain equal in length. You really don't want to get one side too short. It will cut okay, but it begins as the chain wears and you have multiple sharpenings on it, it begins to have a problem. So if you damage one side, which can happen, and the other side might be fine, you're really better off taking both sides down to the same exact length. So I just wanted to cover, again, the wheel, and I wanted to cover that when you are doing this, you don't want to spend a lot of time in the tooth because it hardens the tooth. We're saying it blues the tooth, and it just puts a really hard layer on it, and you're actually get a little lip on there that rolls around where the grinder comes down across it. That's okay. It will come off after running it through a couple pieces of wood. But when you blue the tooth, you're creating a harder grind next time, and it's not making as good a product. So I will double tap, I'll take a cleaning cut, and then I'll just do a real quick like fine cut, and then I'm watching as each tooth goes through the grinder to make sure that everything is the same from one tooth to another, from one side to another. I'm holding tension on the chain so that it's not laying over on either side, and making sure that we're going to have a really good product so that when it goes on the processor, on your chainsaw, that it's ready to go. It takes a lot of time if you're in production to be fooling around with your chains. I always use two chainsaws when I'm at the log site. One is for cutting only, and that chain has to be immaculate. I'll take that chain off my cutting saw and I'll put it on my buck saw so that when I get down to the landing, I've skid for, the skids I'm doing yesterday were 25 minutes long. Well, when you drag stuff through the dirt for 25 minutes one way, you end up filing your buck saw chain quite a bit. So that is always a different chain. I take the chain off my felling saw when it gets a little worn or I'm not happy with it, put it on my buck saw, and then I just will hand file that one. Sometimes I have to hand file if it's bad conditions. I might file 3-4 times in a day. If I'm over 4 times, I'm starting to get frustrated because it does take a lot of time to stop and go through this. I always liked having a shop because you can come in at the end of the day when your energy levels are a little low, sit in a comfortable place, and still find a little bit of energy to put into it. It's something you need to pay attention to, and the more detail you put into it, the more you're going to be satisfied. And really what I'd say at the end of the day is the absolute best thing to do is to immediately use your chains, go out and find out what the response is to what your work was in the shop. That's how I learned. It's all these little micro changes that I made to my hand filing, to when I was grinding, always looking. I'm always trying to do things just a little better. So always just trying to find that little reason why something is or isn't working. And just to reiterate, one of the main things I see is that a bar gets worn out and your chain just falls off to the side. You have a good chain on there and it just doesn't cut. and I'll tell you a rule of thumb for that. If it's cutting on the tip, so your tip of your saw works just perfectly, and then when you go and you put it on a big piece of firewood and you're going down through it, it stops. That is absolute your bar, not your chain. So you want to think about the entire product that you're running in there, and it's always good to have new equipment, a new bar on hand and new chains, and you know, to have a good arsenal when, especially if you're a ways out in the woods, so you can go right to a good product. But thank you for your time. I hope you find this helpful. I will spend as much time as I can with the comments. If I need to do a follow-up video, I'll do one another week or two, just to touch base with any questions that maybe I didn't cover that come in on the comments, especially if I see the same question 4 or 5 times, then I know I didn't cover it properly, or that there's more need to go into further detail. I hope this will help you this firewood season. If I had seen this video 20 years ago, it would have saved me so much time. So please don't hesitate to comment, to question. I want you to have a good experience out there, and a dull chain or a bent bar or your saw just not cutting properly can be very frustrating. So leave some comments. I'll get back to you. Thank you. Have a good weekend.